Hello and welcome to the Majlis podcast, Radio for Europe, Radio Liberty's current affairs talk show focusing on Central Asia. I'm Bruce Pannier, host of the Majlis and author of the weekly Central Asia in Focus newsletter. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO, just held its annual summit in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. With members such as China, Russia, India, and Pakistan, SCO summits always receive a lot of attention. But this year there was a lot of attention directed at conflicts involving individual member states and what these states' leaders did and did not say at the summit and in meetings on the sidelines. So what happened and what didn't happen at the organization's 21st summit? To discuss all this, I am joined by Pahlawan Turgunov, a correspondent for RFE-RL's Uzbek service, known locally as Azadlik, who was in Samarkand covering the summit. Paul Stronsky, a senior fellow at Carnegie Endowment's Russia and Eurasia program and author of many articles on Central Asia and more broadly, politics on the Eurasian continent. And Murad Nasimov, a research assistant in a German Research Foundation-funded project on Eurasian regionalism at the Institute of Political Science, Justus Liebig University of Gießen in Germany, where Murad also teaches courses on politics and methods. So thank you all for joining me. And Pahlawan, I want to start with you. You were in Samarkand for the summit. Tell me a bit about the mood there. What were people discussing?
Well, thank you, Bruce. Hello, everyone. The name of the SCO, shows in Russian, as you know, has become synonymous with the name of Samarkand these days, I would say. City streets, markets, people all seem to have given way to the SCO and the guests arriving from abroad to the summit, for the summit. You will hardly see ordinary people in the Siop market. As you know, there is a huge market in the historical city center in Samarkand, which is called Siop. It's quite famous among local people, among tourists, Western tourists. And the streets in the historical center of the city, which are usually crowded with tourists, so there is a massive security presence here. The start of the academic year in schools, in city schools, was delayed, and the city center was closed on Tuesday when we arrived here, 2 days before the start of the summit. And public transport and regular taxis are also limited in most parts of the city. Mainly special government cars allocated for the summit, and coming from the Tashkent Drive, we journalists were also transported in such cars and specially allocated buses yesterday and today. Preparations for the summit changed the normal lives, changed normal image of the city and people's lives. As I can see, I last visited Samarkand in 2019. The people of Samarkand are quite used to such big events, festivals. As you can imagine, I myself have participated in the coverage of a couple of international cultural events in the past. But the preparations this time, I think, cannot be compared with anything. It can be assumed that ordinary people of Samarkand will feel much lighter now that the summit is over and the roads have been opened now. But I don't know how much the world will get away with it, even though Ukraine was not on the agenda of the summit, on the official agenda of the summit. There were expectations that the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, could send a firmer message to Putin on the issue of Ukraine. But it did not happen. And Xi Jinping talked about, in his today's speech, he talked about further deepening of relations with Russia.
Okay. Thank you very much. Paul, I'm going to come to you then. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization summits, let's be honest, they're not. There's a lot of big leaders there and everything, but they don't really seem to accomplish a heck of a lot at these kind of things. And certainly their joint statements don't reflect anything majorly important or certainly unexpected. How much was the carpet kind of pulled out from underneath the feet of the leaders that they had to deal with an assortment of problems in their countries or involving their countries? As Pahlawan said, we got the problem with Russia and its war in Ukraine, and then of course today. Well, actually, for the last couple of days, there have been tensions along the Tajik-Kyrgyz border, but today it erupted into, full-scale warfare in areas of the border. Armenia and Azerbaijan's leaders were invited. Armenian prime minister did not show up. The Azerbaijani president did show up. How much does this distract from the event of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit?
Well, first, thank you for having me. And I really do think it distracted from the summit. I did notice there was a picture of all of the leaders smiling together, sitting on a couch. I saw Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev in that picture. And it really just struck me as quite removed from the reality of what is happening in the broader region right now. And nobody really wanted to talk about that. And the realities are, one, Russia got routed earlier this week in Ukraine. Two, the Azerbaijani-Armenian situation has really moved into sort of an active phase, the worst violence we've seen in years. And then three, the violence that we've seen in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, which again I think is extremely troubling. This context was not really addressed. And it was, a meeting where everyone looked happy. But I think what we're seeing is we're going to be seeing a lot of shifts in the region. First of all, I would kind of disagree that Ukraine was not really on the table. We didn't know what President Xi and President Putin talked about, but Putin's remarks yesterday about how there were differences he admitted the differences in the Chinese view of global politics of Ukraine. I think that's quite noteworthy that he actually admitted that. I also think there were statements, I believe maybe from Mirziyoyev, about how they did not want to turn the SCO into an anti-Western organization. The fact that two of the biggest members there have strong anti-Western policies, and the West is against these as well. So what I did see Ukraine in the background here, and I did see a very uncomfortable group of actually Central Asian leaders who have lots of problems, are dancing a very delicate balancing act here. And they're also quite busy, running around the world. Tokayev had Xi, he also had the Pope all in 1 week. And so, there's a lot going on, and this was just one bit.
Great. Thank you very much. And Murad, I know that you've been watching these SCO summits for a while, too. What's different about this one than the other ones? I mean, this was supposed to be, a great event. Certainly, the Silk Route city of Samarkand, it looked like it was going to be practically a festival or a party or something, but it didn't turn out that way. How did this summit different from previous ones?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, having me. And I think already Paul mentioned a number of issues that would come as an answer to your question. Well, before the call, I wanted to write down a number of issues that make this summit special or different or more meaningful than the previous ones. So, first of all, this was the first time that the SCO summit was held in a face-to-face format since the 2019 summit in Bishkek, and it was the largest, if I'm not mistaken, this was the largest summit. I mean, in the sense that it has the largest attendance ever SCO summit had. So we saw Turkish President Erdogan there, Aliyev there. And of course, the fact that this happened amid the war in Ukraine, escalation on the Armenian-Azerbaijani border and Tajik-Kyrgyz border, and the tension around Taiwan. So this made more meaningful the summit and attracted attention from all around the world. And of course, another point is Xi Jinping's visit. It's the first visit abroad since the beginning of the pandemic, if I'm not mistaken. Last time his visit was to Myanmar in 2019. And it's also important for Jinping because of the upcoming important meeting of the Chinese Communist Party leadership, where he will seek a third term in office. But we know that China experienced a drastic economic slowdown and harsh administrative measures, which of course didn't make Chinese happy. So obviously, Jinping was seeking to boost confidence in himself, and then when he's back to his country to portray a foreign policy success. And of course, what is important is that also first time since the clash between China and India in the Galwan Valley, Indian Prime Minister Modi and Chinese leader Xi Jinping shared the stage. Well, there were a number of other issues like the implementation plan for the 2023 and 2027 period of the Treaty on Long-Term Good Neighborliness, Friendship and Cooperation, which was signed in 2007, and this was the 15th anniversary of the treaty, and it's actually also mentioned in the Samarkand declaration. And yeah, again, first time leaders were meeting face to face after the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and obviously Afghanistan was on the table, and we know that there are differences and nuances of the views of the member states, particularly between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan in Central Asia. Uzbekistan, the loudest supporter of taking a proactive approach towards the Taliban, while Tajikistan got concerns with that. But overall, all countries, all the member states want to see no further destabilization in Afghanistan. And I was expecting, and like many other experts, that Ukrainian topic would be publicly played down. And as Paul said already, it was. But of course, definitely it was in bilateral and close discussion of the leaders. Yeah, well, that's what I think I could have for now. And yeah, maybe perhaps last thing, yeah, Iran memorandum or Iran's admission is important in the sense that it's the first time since the 1979, the Islamic Revolution, Iran is joining an international organization, and Qatar's and Egypt's partnership status were confirmed, but we know that there are around 10 countries seeking a dialogue partnership status for themselves in this organization, like Maldives, Syria, Israel, Bahrain, Iraq, and Saudi. And we need also here to remember that Azerbaijan applied for the upgrade of its status long before, and we learned from Ilham Aliyev's speech in one of his recent visits to Russia that Azerbaijan hasn't received any official answer to its application for the upgrade of the status. So a number of issues. And just before the call, I was very quickly reading the Samarkand Declaration. 5 documents were adopted, Samarkand Declaration, and 4 other statements on climate change, supply chain, food security, and energy security. So there are lots of emphasis on multilateralism in multipolar world, particularly in the Samarkand Declaration. And there are many other points I think we'll have a chance to discuss. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent, and we certainly will discuss that in the second half of the show. We'll try to get at the core of what kind of influence the Shanghai Cooperation Organization actually has. But while we got Paklawan here, Paklawan, you would have spoken with a lot of people, about other journalists, people who were attending this summit, whether to cover it or just as invited guests, but obviously not the leaders. What were some of the main topics? What were people interested in talking about?
Well, first of all, there is a massive media presence here to cover the summit, including Azad League. Azad League was granted temporary accreditation for the first time since 2005, since the Andijan massacre. During the summit, we asked the quite critical questions. We had always asked the authorities about the economic situation in Uzbekistan, about political human rights situation in Uzbekistan, and tried to get answers from them. But often, instead of clear answer, responses were, could you have imagined that the journalists of Azad League would come, or BBC would come to Uzbekistan 5 years ago? So it shows that Uzbekistan is changing. More than 400 foreign journalists visited to cover the summit, including some Western publications. There were no obstacles in the process of covering the summit. We easily communicate with people in the streets and markets. People here are familiar with our work, with the work of RFRL, Azad League. There were also people who were, when we interviewed some people in the SCO market here, there were people that were surprised to see that we are from Radio Liberty. Journalists working for the government publications communicate with us without fear. This time, because we had an official accreditation from the government. But at the same time, the opportunity to communicate with the authorities was quite limited, I would say. There was only one briefing after they have signed the Samarkand Declaration, after the summit ended. There was a briefing with the participation of the Uzbek Foreign Minister Vladimir Norov and the General Secretary of the SCO, Zhang Min. They both made a statement, kind of final statement on the results of the summit, but they did not take any questions from the journalists. But there were many questions to be asked, in particular, as you and Paul mentioned, the military clashes that's been happening today on the Kyrgyz-Tajik border. Neither the leaders of the two countries nor the SCO officials have made any statements about this. Instead, the heads of states, both President of Tajikistan and Presidents of Kyrgyzstan, talked about the fight against extremism and international terrorism, as well as the cybersecurity in cooperation with other members of the Shanghai Organization. It's not clear how in the light of the clash that is happening on the Kyrgyz-Tajik border today, it's not clear how the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which puts the regional security first and regional cooperation, will act in situations as such.
Great, thank you. What? Just to try to get this a little bit more clear. What topic did you hear people talking about the most on the when you were hanging around, when you were there, listening to the conferences, talking with other people, journalists? What one topic was the most popular? What did you hear the most when you were there? Was it Putin?
Well,
Xi Jinping?
Yeah, it was mainly Putin and the Ukraine. Ukraine was the main topic which was being discussed among journalists, local and foreign journalists. And as I said, it was not on the official agenda. It was a main topic discussed between leaders. I mean, Putin, Xi Jinping, and Putin and Erdogan during the bilateral meetings. But Uzbek officials did not want the topic of Ukraine to dominate the summit and to be the main topic. Instead, they were emphasizing the importance of the regional cooperation, importance of the investment and kind of logistical projects, including Termez, Mazar-e-Sharif, Kabul, and Peshawar railway project. But the Ukraine was kind of main topic of the discussions around the summit.
Before I let you go, you mentioned the one railway. Well, what about the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbek railway?
Yes, one such project was the construction of the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan railway. On the eve of the summit, I think 2 days before the summit, agreement was signed between China, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan to start part of the construction project that will pass through Kyrgyzstan in 2023. I think this agreement can be said to be one of the most concrete results of the summit so far. The extended meeting of the heads of state, which took place today, President Mirziyoyev called on the leaders of Shanghai Organization to support the construction of another important project, Termez Mazar-e-Sharif Kabul Peshawar Railway. Both projects, as you know, will reduce the dependence of Uzbekistan and other Central Asian countries on transit routes which pass through Russia. But Uzbek officials during our conversations did not want to emphasize that these projects bypass Russia. That is to say, they avoid talking about the geopolitical kind of significance of these projects. And the other aspect of the summit was the budget of the summit. Events in Samarkand often took place in the historical center of the city, Registan Square, but this time all events were held at the newly established Great Silk Road Tourist Center. It is on the outskirts of Samarkand. This center itself can be said to be a whole city. The center was opened on the eve of the summit, and millions of dollars were spent on its construction. We asked authorities, officials about the total amount which was spent on holding this summit, but we did not get a clear answer. it is clear that it did not come cheap for the state budget of Uzbekistan, where 2 to 3 million people every year travel for work abroad. We talked to experts close to the government about it, but I should say that in comparison to from Karimov's time, they do admit that the problem of poverty in the country persists, and the real income of the population is still low. And they say that the projects within the framework of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which will eventually help, should eventually help the population to get out of poverty, and that Uzbekistan is using Chinese anti-poverty strategy as well.
Thank you very much for explaining all that stuff. That's interesting about the new center, too, that they decided to build. Okay, well, we've reached the midway point of the podcast, so it's time for me to give a reminder that this is the Majlis podcast, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's weekly current affairs talk show focusing on Central Asia. I'm Bruce Pannier, host of the Majlis and author of the weekly Central Asia in Focus newsletter. On this episode, we're talking about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit that was just held in Samarkand in Uzbekistan. And I'm joined by Paul Stronsky, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment's Russia and Eurasia program and author of many articles on Central Asia, and more broadly on the political situation on the Eurasian continent. Murad Nasibov, research assistant at the German Research Foundation-funded project on Eurasian regionalism at the Institute of Political Science at Justus Liebig University of Gießen in Germany, where Murad also teaches courses on politics and methods, and Paklan Turgunov, correspondent for RFERL's Uzbek service, known locally as Azad Lik, who was in Samarkand covering the summit. Paul, okay, we'll get to the second half of the show. We want to talk about what the significance is of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You know, it's been around 21 years as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, 26 if you want to go back to the Shanghai Five when it started. Does it really have that much influence in world politics? It looks threatening. You know, on paper, it looks amazing. You have these leaders like China, Russia, Pakistan, India, the Central Asian countries, with the exception of Turkmenistan. They're looking to expand. Iran's getting in next year. You know, half the world's population is in the countries of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But is it any threat at all?
Thanks for that question. I mean, I think in theory, it has potential to be an extremely influential organization. As you said, it involves, key leaders of, some of the world's most dynamic and rapidly changing countries. But it traditionally has been very high in the symbolism. There have been lots of agreements over the years, but not all of those agreements have been fulfilled. And for cooperation, economic development, it is very much a way in which I think regional powers try to balance a very complicated geostrategic environment where you have, Russia and China and India, all of whom have very complicated relations, and Pakistan with each other. And I think you just look at there's tension in the Russian-Chinese relationship over Ukraine, we now know. There's always tension between China and India, Pakistan. And then Ukraine has also created tensions between Russia and many of its Central Asian neighbors. Just to highlight also the tensions on the border between Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. So this is a format that in theory, should be able to be a solutions provider. But I think the organization, brings together groups with various different internal and external problems. It's certainly a way in which they can discuss them, but beyond discussing, beyond pledging, I don't see a whole lot of fulfillment. And I particularly think, this is a region that this week has been highly destabilized. And as I said before, I saw a lot of smiles. I didn't see a whole lot of solutions coming down. And you had all the big players there who, could have come up with solutions. And I didn't really see that. So I think that's, one of the biggest issues. And then its expansion is very wide. It now has to cover, a whole bunch of different geographic and other political issues that I think makes coming to any sort of consensus or really, big discussion. It certainly is important as we move towards a multipolar world. It is a non-Western dominated multilateral organization. I think, all of the states value that, but I don't think it has it certainly doesn't have the same political or security impact as many of the other organizations that have been out there for a long time.
That's great. That's exactly what I wanted you to talk about. Thank you very much for clarifying all this. Murad, I want to move over to you. Given what Paul just said, and let's add a couple things to this too. There was domestic unrest in Kazakhstan this year. There was domestic unrest in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. We know that China's got problems in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region right now that are rightfully getting a lot of attention. I mean, do you see any cohesion? Anything? What keeps together actually the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? Is it an organization, or is this more of a chance for? Is it more of a forum for leaders of these countries to kind of meet without really resolving any major issues?
Well, your question reminded me Dushanbe's statement of 2000. So when just before the SCO was established, there was a Shanghai 5, and in Dushanbe the statement made in Dushanbe in 2000 said they oppose intervention in other countries' internal affairs on the pretext of humanitarianism and protecting human rights, and support the efforts of one another in safeguarding the country's national independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and social stability, and etc. And then they also said that they oppose the use of force and threat of force. Yeah, if you look at what they promised even before adopting the chart of the organization, what the core promised, some of remain there. So they keep still the spirit of the Dushanbe statement. But of course, if you consider what they told about the use of force before and what we see now Russia is doing in Ukraine, yeah, of course, these kind of things hasn't been held. Yeah, well, the point is that if you compare SCO to the EU or NATO or any other Western-style organization, of course, you would say that there is not much cohesion there. What is important is that they managed to keep this spirit together, to use it as a platform to meet each other and to make a lot of agreements and treaties, bilateral or multilateral, in the last 20 years. So it has been effective. I believe it has been effective in bringing the region together and offering a platform, out of which came many bilateral developments. Yeah, we know that China is using this kind of organization also in East Asia, Southeast Asia, to expand its influence. From China's perspective, it's an organization that China can use to expand its influence, to boost its footprint in Central Asia. And we know that, yes, China is doing this. They invested more than 22 billion in Kazakh economy, and they are investing in Uzbekistan. We know that recently they started producing jointly Chinese vaccines, and in Kazakhstan they invested in pipelines, wind power, oil refining, auto manufacturing. So of course all these are not the outcomes of the organization, but I believe in achieving all these, having the organization was important. But one specific area where organization plays particular role is what they frame terrorism, extremism, and radicalism. Yeah. They have this regional anti-terroristic center, which also cooperates with the corresponding center of the CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States. And they have permanent organs in Central Asian countries, and they have been successful in moving slowly, gradually. Yeah, it's an incremental process, but it would be really unfair to say that they haven't achieved anything in the last 20 years. And achievement is significant in particular specific fields. Yeah, that would be shortest answer.
Okay, that's good. And I'm going to pick up on something. I'm going to come back to you right now, Murad, and I'm going to, Paul, in a minute, I'm going to ask you the same question. Did the balance of power in the SCO just shift over this weekend? You mentioned China and the role that it's been playing for a long time, that it's actually been investing in, the kind of the financial backbone of the SCO for a long time. Given Putin's weakness over Ukraine, did everyone always thought China and Russia were at the top of this organization? Did it just shift and is now China at the top of this organization alone?
Yes, I would say yes, absolutely. Simply because China has now the upper hand in its relationship with Russia, and China is now the one in the region who can invest more, and Central Asian countries now need more investment, more injections into the economies because they inevitably suffered from the Western sanctions on Russia. And one place, the closest one, where they would turn for support is China, definitely. And Central Asian countries at the top of the list comes Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. They are absolutely interested in developing their economic relations with China. And interestingly, before his visit to Kazakhstan, there were a number of essays published in Chinese media highlighting the historical ties with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And one of the essays was saying that if they want rapid development, they can board the express train of China. So these are the areas. The economic development is the area where China will definitely lead, investing more in infrastructure, and it has absolutely more resources than Russia. And definitely China will now be leading from now on the organization. And what we can expect in the future, we know that there were calls by different actors like Pakistan to use local currencies in trade among the members of the organization. Iran called for a single SCO currency. We don't know how much feasible these proposals are now, but these will be considerations of the future, definitely. And any development in this regard definitely strengthen China's influence within the organization and in the region overall.
Great, thank you very much. And Paul, I got the same question to you too. Is this summit going to be remembered as the one when China really showed that it's the senior partner of this organization? And I have a follow-up question about Central Asia's role, but first I'll let you answer the question about China's role in the SCO.
Yeah, I mean, I think several things. I would almost put Putin's remarks yesterday when he came back and acknowledged that Russia and China do not see eye to eye on everything in the Ukraine war. I mean, he looked like he was almost a little chastened schoolboy, and I think he really saw a shift in the power dynamics there. We also saw lots of talk about history. I mean, as you just mentioned, about Kazakh and Chinese history, but also I think she went to Kazakhstan first. I think that was noteworthy. Also reiterated the importance of Kazakhstani sovereignty, signed these deals with Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan that could eventually lead to a middle corridor. I'll believe it when I see it, but we're definitely seeing a shift, one that is rhetorically, but one in which I think the Chinese leadership has certainly warned the Russian leadership that it's kind of watching its behavior in this region, and I'm sure that for Central Asian states that's a positive thing. I also think we just sort of need to look at sort of the long-term shifts here. I was expecting a few more things out of or if you asked me 2 years ago, I was expecting we had all of these agreements between Tashkent and Moscow, and one thing that seemed to be missing was Eurasian Union membership. That's not something I kind of thought we were heading a year or two ago, heading in that direction. I think it's notable that did not happen. I also think it's notable that the SCO is one of many organizations that is now active here, and the region is it's certainly very useful. I would agree. It's better to have a talking platform than a non-talking platform. I believe, we see a lot of interesting things happening on the bilateral level here. So I think, it is certainly a useful platform. It's certainly a helpful platform in which, the sort of geopolitical dynamics can be talked about, can be balanced out with each other. But I also think, it's pretty clear that this is a region that is still very much in flux. Yes, the SCO is certainly there. China is certainly in the lead at this point. Russia's clout seems to be weakening as a direct result of what it did of its aggression in Ukraine. But this balancing that we're seeing within the SCO, we're still seeing elsewhere. I happen to be doing this interview from Brussels, where I've met with lots of EU officials, and I've heard a lot about re-engagement and receptiveness of Central Asian countries, not to be just left between Russia or China and real desire to figure out a new path. And I think the statements about not wanting this to become an anti-Western organization. I think we're seeing Central Asia and Central Asian states in various different means try to steer it in a way in which this is not just an organization that is used in which these countries are used as tools of China or Russia against the West. They want to have some agency in this too, and I think we're seeing some of that. So I would not be surprised if we see this institution evolve. It will probably grow, but it'll be interesting to see how those dynamics evolve.
This is perfect because you managed to help me transit right into my next question, which is when several years ago, when Pakistan and India were both still candidates to get in, but it was obvious that they were going to get in. But then Uzbek President Islam Karimov objected to either one of those countries getting in, and he said, that the Central Asian states, if you put India and Pakistan in with China and Russia, the Central Asian states will have such little say in what's going on in this organization. We'll lose there won't be any sign of equality. We'll lose any influence that we had in the organization. Do you think that this summit, especially with Russia's influence kind of receding in the region, do you think the Central Asians were successful in projecting themselves, projecting their agency within this organization, and more importantly, internationally, globally?
I do. I think, what we've seen in the last, several years, another aspect of this, and I think, probably the changeover from Karimov to Mirziyoyev has helped facilitate this, but we're seeing much more regional cooperation. Certainly, the SCO probably jump-started that, but I think we're seeing an ability, particularly with new leaders, to talk about the regional problems, to talk about regional solutions, and not just depend on everyone else to do that. Certainly, they're going to need outside money to do that, but I think we are seeing them assert themselves either in what they're signing, when they're signing it, who they're signing it with. I think we're seeing a lot of pushback against Russia, and I also see other organizations and other entities getting involved. We're seeing a re-engagement of Turkey. Interesting, it's there, but we also see the Organization of Turkic States, which is another interesting platform that I'm sure we could talk about at some point too. But I do see these countries, the SCO is a place in which they are trying to assert themselves. They're trying to use some of the outside powers, mostly China, to assert themselves vis-a-vis Russia. And I have a feeling this trend will continue.
Great. Thank you very much. And Murat, kind of the same question to you too. Do you see that the Central Asian states are they standing more firmly on their own feet now after this summit in Samarkand? And also how much does it mean to them that Azerbaijan and Turkey were included in this?
Well, your question to me, and also your question reminded me one of our outcomes we have in our research here. Part of our project, we are we're conducting thematic analysis of publications, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, CSTO, and CIS in the last 20 years. Interestingly, one of the themes coming up is that the epistemic community, the Russian-speaking, not necessarily only Russian community, Russian scholars, but Russian-speaking also those in Central Asia community, epistemic community, they see that it provides access to Central Asian states to international forums. So this was kind of obviously from the beginning the idea why Central should be there. But with the growing number of members in the organization, India and Pakistan joined in 2017. Full membership will be shown it's expected to be official in April 2023, which is really short time compared to previous clearance. And while Belarus is on the way at some point, Mongolia would also be added, and Azerbaijan previous visits why that is not taken on board. But with the growing number of members, observers, and dialogue partners, there's a risk that the organization marginal utility will go down. And first, and second, China's lead role will also be influenced. When you keep it short, when you keep the least short, so it's that China's role will be really influential. But when you get more and more on the board, particularly from outside the region, or from far region, it will be everybody's stake will go down definitely. And as Azerbaijan and Turkey, they're interested in participating in different, and this is an important for them. Azerbaijan rejected CSTO membership default, was happy to be around the seat here as SCO. And Paul mentioned the Turkic state organization of Turkic states, also very important to discuss. What's the linkage of these topic to what we are discussing is that Turkey has been leading certain regionalism. It started the ritual of regionalism in 2000s, but we know that it gained some important grounds and economic transportation, energy grounds, and these are the grounds that shared also by SCO. So naturally, Turkey is interested to be part of it and not to be seen as a country running an alternative regionalism that excludes the others.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. A little bit of mic breaking in and out, but thank you, Murad. Okay, well, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of the broadcast. I could talk about this for a long, long time. There's a lot of topics we couldn't even get to. But so I'd like to thank our guests. I'll give you one quick shot to get in one or two sentences if you think I missed something. Paul, anything you want to add to the conversation?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I felt this was a really productive conversation. I mean, the only other thing that I think we could add is that I think the Central Asian states also need to be very careful. I think they warned this isn't going to be it should not be an anti-Western organization, but they need to make sure. I think for Russia, this summit was very important because it highlighted that Russia is not fully globally isolated. But then again, when you look at some of the people who were in attendance, I believe Lukashenko was at the couch that I noticed where everyone was smiling. This is an organization that the non-Central Asian big powers want to use to convey global influence and increasingly expand it. And I think they do so at Central Asia's expense, as I think Murad mentioned, and a broader, wider, bigger SCO does not necessarily make it a more effective organization or a better organization to problem solve in Central Asia.
Great, thank you. Murad, any last thoughts?
Well, more generally, what we see today is the confrontation between Western world and Eurasia. Yeah, it's not just a combined confrontation of Eurasian states with West, but each has their own problem. Yeah, China, they're in Taiwan, and more globally, something else. Russia, something else. It's interesting to remember this summit. I believe we'll be remembering this summit in the upcoming year as marking a Eurasian group which doesn't accept Western hegemony, which doesn't mean also that they're necessarily seeing themselves in conflict with West. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Murad. And thank you, Paul, and Mr. Pahlawan for being on the program. And also a big thank you, as always, to Nathan Shoemaker, our Majlis podcast producer in Washington, D.C., and the one that makes all the magic happen when you hear the broadcast on Sunday. And a reminder, you can subscribe to the Majlis podcast or Central Asian Focus newsletter by visiting RFARL's website at rfarl.org. Thanks, and we'll be back next week.